Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where we support those who stand up for their God-given rights enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. I am Stephanie Weidel. We were given a great gift in the Constitution. It's the gift of religious freedom. Here to talk about the state of religious liberty within our country is Brad Dacus, founder of the Pacific Justice Institute. But before we start, let me encourage you to check out our website where you can learn more about us, where you can sign up for our newsletters to stay up to date with what we're doing, and where you can donate towards our efforts. Visit us at fedsforfreedom.org. Brad Dacus founded the Pacific Justice Institute in 1997, dedicating it to the defense of constitutional rights. Pacific Justice Institute has since grown into one of the largest Christian nonprofit organizations, offering legal, free of charge services to defend faith and family. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. It's wonderful to meet you.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be in your program.
Well, Brad, I wanted to talk with you today about the state of religious liberty in America. Religious liberty is the backbone to our country. It is under extraordinary attack and from unlikely places. Often we think, I think we're given a narrative on the news that religious liberty violations look like not allowing someone to bring a Bible into a school, or not allowing someone to pray at a street corner, or not allowing someone to choose who they bake a cake for or not based on their religious beliefs. But people deny that you can have a religious objection to something like a COVID shot. So even now, people, Christians even, consider that vaccine exemptions for shots like COVID or other scheduled ones have nothing to do with religious beliefs, but they say they instead stem from medical misinformation. So what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's such a shame, because I think we've lost the whole concept of what religious freedom is and what it really means. So I know this one friend who's Christian. He said to me, he says, there's nothing biblical about religious objection to a vaccine. There's nothing in the Bible, mandating that. And I said, well, if your definition of Christianity is saying a prayer and saying a prayer of salvation, and then doing the do's and don'ts explicitly stated in Scripture, and that's your definition, well, I totally understand that. But if your definition of Christianity is entering into a real personal relationship with the living God, with the Holy Spirit guiding and directing us, and never leaving us or forsaking us, and living for God and following His direction in a personal way in our lives, I says, then your test doesn't meet the burden of what a real Christian is. Real Christianity is that living relationship, seeking God's guidance and direction. And so we as people, I'm a Christian, and people who are Christians need to make a point to not just look at the technical do's and don'ts of what is technically mandated, what is not, but rather, what does God want me to do in this situation? And look for that direction and that conviction. And that's exactly what we at Pacific Justice Institute have done in taking on and in representing and providing assistance to thousands and thousands across America who do not want to have to choose between putting bread and butter on the table and providing housing for their family versus abiding by their faith and conviction and calling as a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. What does this mean for the state of religious liberty in our country?
Yeah, some people some politicians say, they use a phrase, I believe in freedom of worship. That's what they'll say. We should have the freedom to worship. Basically, they're saying we should have the freedom to go to church or synagogue. That's not religious freedom. Religious freedom is understanding that your religion and your faith isn't something that you are allowed to afford respect for 1 or 2 hours on a Sunday or a Saturday. Religious freedom is understanding that people have a right to live their faith 24/7, 7 days a week. And in order for the government to intrude on those convictions, the government has to show a compelling state interest and that their infringement must be absolutely necessary, both in the most least restrictive, least burdensome way possible to meet that interest. So that's real, true religious freedom, which means it applies to every aspect potentially of our life and work, home, recreation, you name it. It needs to be respected absent the compelling state interest standard.
Would you give a scenario for us that would be a compelling argument the government could make that, like, I was thinking, and this is really silly, but a stop sign. Okay, I could say my religious beliefs tell me that I can go through a stop sign and not stop.
That's
That doesn't make sense.
You're right, and and people could say, well, I'm going to choose for my religious freedom argument. Well, first off, I'd say uh, almost all the people making that argument really don't probably have religion at all. If they do, they don't have much of a religion. It's probably just something they're making up to justify their rebellious actions and not respecting authority and government. But that would be government would have a compelling state interest for health and safety to say, no, you have to stop at the stop sign, irrespective of your religious beliefs to the contrary. Another example might be someone who says, I believe in cocaine and I'm going to be a cocaine drug dealer because pushing cocaine is evangelizing my faith. Government saying, no, cocaine is a menace to society. It results in crime, destroys lives. Absolutely not. You can't do that. So you cannot be a cocaine dealer. There's a little case law dealing with people who are part of an Indian tribe that use peyote, in their own personal religious capacity. There's a little carve out. But drug dealers, no, you're not protected, even if you have quote unquote religious beliefs. So religion is not something people can just draw out of a hat and use whatever they want, get out of jail free card. Religion is something that must be sincere. You must be able to validate it and show that it's real to you. And it has to be something also that doesn't result in harm to others or violate a compelling state interest like health and safety, national
Mhm.
security. Those are all compelling state interests.
But that's exactly what a lot of our citizens and the government said that vaccine deniers were, that they were that they were a national security threat and that they were spreading disease, and that's why they had to get the shot because it was gonna save everybody. Like, at least do it for other people. Get the shot for other people. So, legally, how did you respond to that? And
Yeah.
so the question is, where's the line drawn?
Well, yeah, we at Pacific Justice, we definitely did respond to it. But I will say first off, with regards to the COVID quote unquote vaccine, there's several problems with it. Number one, it was not tested, and in fact, has resulted in thousands. Some people estimate up to 3 million lives lost. It's horrific when you look at the standard of those that were reported related deaths to the vaccine is less than 1%. If you times that out by 100, you're theoretically looking at over 3 million potential fatalities, people who died from the vaccine. Now, people say that number is too high. If you look at it, whatever you want to, however you want to angle it, there were a large number of people who died because of the vaccine. Several million who have ongoing long-term disability issues, from brain fog to neuro issues to heart issues. So it was a flop. It was a huge disaster of a mistake. It was not proven. It was not established. It's one thing to do a rapid fire, get this research, get this thing out on the market so people have a choice. It's another thing to mandate people to do it.
Mhm.
Well, when he was president, pushed it out to get it rapid fire out there so people had a choice. Biden mandated it to inject it in every human being, whether they like it or not. And that's what was so horrific to so many people. I know a dozen right now who have either died or have had serious medical consequences. So that's number one. It really wasn't preventive. Number two, it really wasn't a vaccine. With the impression we got from TV commercials was, oh, be vaccinated so you don't cause your grandparent to die and to catch it from you. That was a lie. There was nothing in Big Pharma proving that. But they allowed it to go out anyway and created this false impression that somehow you're saving other people. Well, here's the point. If it doesn't prevent transmission, if the vaccine does not prevent transmission, then the government and employers have absolutely zero interest and right to force someone to take an experimental quote unquote vaccine that's not even really a vaccine in the classical sense and assume that risk, a risk that the employers weren't willing to compensate for, neither nor the government. So this is it was a travesty, and it also was a total disrespect for those who prayed about it and just felt convicted. The religious convictions, by the way, across the country, it was not because some televangelist had said, God told me people don't do this, or because some TV campaign from some ministry organization. No, this was just massively across the nation. Just people who on their own just felt, you know what, I'm praying about this. I just feel like I'm not supposed to take this. And I believe it was a divine act of God for those who are willing to listen, not to take it. That's my personal belief, because I see statistically there's really was no explanation as to why the masses, without any orchestration, would suddenly, for this time, resist a quote vaccine, when in the past our society has always accepted them. As it turns out, the people who rejected it were absolutely right in assessing a risk that was not being revealed to them.
Right. Regardless, though, of its safety or efficacy or whatever, no one should be forced to, like you were saying, to take a shot like this. I mean, regardless
Right.
of the science.
Well, exactly. And also, people, let's say that it was successful. Let's say it was preventing spread. Let's say all these things. This vaccine, along with, say, other vaccines, let's say other vaccines, the government interest is they don't want to have a pandemic. They don't want a massive spread. Well, if you have enough people who are quote unquote vaccinated, you have what's called herd immunity. Herd immunity is about a 92% vaccination. And that's more than enough to compensate people with religious convictions. So there really is no compelling state interest, even from that perspective, of some health and safety issue. You have herd immunity, then there's no legitimate state interest, because there will be no pandemic when you have herd immunity. This is established science, but this all goes into play on the issue of whether or not the state has, or the government has, a compelling state interest, like health and safety. If they don't, then religious freedom must be respected, because that is has the highest protection under the Constitution of any right. Is that requiring compelling state interest? You can't have a higher level of constitutional protection than that requiring strict scrutiny, or and like the issue of religious freedom or free speech, for that matter.
Hmm. So currently in the military, dozens are being discharged, going through the discharge proceedings over their refusal to get the flu shot. There's been a lot of waking up with the COVID mandates, and they've looked into the ingredients in the flu shot. They cannot consciously take this shot because they know it doesn't work. They know it some of them have reactions to the flu shot that's put them in the hospital. Some of them will not be injected with aborted fetal cells. So what do you make of the continued denying or ignoring of vaccine exemptions? Because all of these shots should have an exemption process. That
Right.
is not happening. What do
Yeah.
you make of that?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. For a little bit of history here. So as far as, I want people to distinguish this from the COVID vaccine. So on January 10th, it was announced this year that, okay, we're not going to mandate the COVID vaccine. And then January 27th, an executive order came out that says anyone who is discharged because of the COVID vaccine you not only can come back to the military, we'll put you back and reinstate you into the rank that you were before. No harm, no foul. Come on back. We'd love to have you. But that was for the COVID vaccine objectors, not for flu vaccine or other vaccine objectors. The flu vaccine is a vaccine, but however, it has about a 60, sometimes a 30 or 40% efficacy rate.
And it has negative efficacy, according to the Cleveland Clinic. 27% were likely to get the flu.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the problem. Sometimes even counterproductive. I heard of a study recently that said it's actually, if you're going to do it, just do it every other year. It's actually better off doing it that way than every year. But even then, there's also studies showing that those who've had, like out of the British Journal, those who've had the flu vaccine 5 years in a row have a higher risk of early Alzheimer's dementia. One study, I'm not saying, thus saith medicine, but that was one study out of the British Journal, which is very reputable. And there's many doctors who are against vaccines, avidly against vaccines, who are very respected. And so I think it's, first off, it's controversial. I think it's very refutable. And the bottom line is, when you have, once again, herd immunity, which is the overall majority of those in the military getting the vaccine, then you have no risk of a pandemic, and there is no threat to national security, even if there was a massive flu outbreak and the vaccine happened to be the right concoction that year to prevent it. And if it's not, then the vaccine's irrelevant anyway. So there's going back to state interest. I don't believe there is a compelling state interest for this. We at Pacific Justice would have a military law expert, Karen White, out of our Trenton, New Jersey office back east. She personally helped between, it was a little over 700 people in the military not lose their jobs because of the COVID vaccine. We kept them protected in the military, and people who have religious vaccine convictions like this, in the military, they can contact us. Right now, based on case law, it doesn't look good. I'll just be frank with you. As far as the flu vaccine opting out, the case law is not favorable in terms of religious objections and accommodation. That said, I do believe that the Trump administration is open, especially with RFK Jr., where he is in the Trump administration. I think they'll be very open to allowing, at the very least, a religious exemption, and that's something that we're going to be working on and addressing in the future with the Trump administration.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Hegseth and RFK both know that this is happening, and yet it has not been stopped. And the question is why?
Yeah,
So,
it's a good question. I've been called an optimist. I'm going to be flying there. We already have 2 pending executive orders. One, the Trump administration already has reportedly likes, and he's having his legal team look at it before he signs off on it. The other one, I'm going to be flying in a couple of weeks to meet with some people, hopefully in DC, to get it passed. What you're advocating is something else that I'll be mentioning. I'll be meeting with, someone very close to the Trump, President Trump, and this is something that I'll be addressing
great.
at that time. So,
Yes. And let me ask, you keep talking about compelling state interest. In the law now, are you saying compelling state interest comes above religious freedoms?
yeah, religious freedom. The courts have held that religious freedom is not an absolute right. In fact, there's no right that you could ever call really an absolute right. Even the right to life is not an absolute right. If you've done premeditated murder, you're convicted of first-degree murder and given the death penalty. But our Constitution, when we have something that's a fundamental right, as say the religious freedom, free speech, the government is to give it the highest level of protection, absent something that is protecting is a compelling state interest. That's the highest standard afforded under the Constitution based on case law. Maybe in the future there'll be something that brings it to a higher level. But like, for example, this Supreme Court that we have taken this religious freedom more seriously than any Supreme Court in U.S. history. Unbelievably, the case law that we have seen established pushing back on a broad, narrowing the interpretation and application of the Establishment Clause while expanding out the interpretation of the Free Exercise Clause back closer to original intent of our founding fathers. It's been tremendous. It's been incredible. And that's why we at Pacific Justice are so aggressive. We have over 280 cases in active litigation coast to coast. And one of the reasons is we see so much potential pushing out these cases, getting them up to the Supreme Court so we can further solidify and expand this proper protection of religious freedom to have the broadest protection under the standard, which is the compelling state interest standard.
Yeah. When you explain it like this, I hope every person of faith is vigilant and stays vigilant no matter who is in power in Washington.
Yeah.
Because religious freedoms will always be on edge. You always have to stand up for your own, religious beliefs.
Yeah, and especially in a society like we have today. Now, I just gave you this rosy picture of how the Supreme Court's moving in the right direction, which is fantastic. However, we have another cloud we can look at. It's a dark cloud, and that is society overall. And when I was growing up as a boy, there are two groups of people. There are those who went to church, and those be knowing they should be going to church. And they say, "Pastor, sorry, I had one brisket too many last night. Next Sunday, I'll try to be there." Right? I'm dating myself here. I know that. But now we have two groups. We have those who are sincere followers of Christ and their beliefs as Christians, or if they're Hebrew, and the Torah. And then you have those who hate and despise people of faith, would like us put in concentration camps, deprogrammed. If you did a poll, you'd probably find at least 1 in 5 are radical, anti-Christian, anti-faith. And so we have this huge threat of not just complacency towards religion or lack of value, but actual hate and hostility of it. And with regards to movements and social agendas that don't agree with the values of people of faith. So therefore, their goal is to silence, to quote the Southern Poverty Law Center, to silence, vilify, and destroy those who have those beliefs. And that's why the threat is also so large from a social perspective, and the need for people to speak up. Otherwise, we will lose our freedoms and our liberties. And that's why we have 36 offices coast to coast, over 280 cases in active litigation. Our goal is, Stephanie, is to make sure that no one is ever left on the side of the road, ever, when it comes to issues of religious freedom, parents' rights against the government, or the sanctity of human life.
That's an excellent mission. Let me offer, is there another subset, though, within the church, those who do follow their beliefs? And we are not necessarily a Christian organization. However, we uphold Christian values within our organization. But there are the group within the religious realm that absolutely vilified the vaccine objectors. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a real shame, because this is where religious tolerance, religious freedom really comes to the surface. That is, to what extent do people respect people's religious beliefs and convictions when it doesn't agree with their own? That's the real test of religious freedom. Not when someone has a conviction that you agree with, but when someone has a religious conviction you don't agree with, yet you still vie for their respect and protection for them to practice their faith. That is very tested in times like this, dealing with things like vaccine mandates. Employers, for example, that's a classic example where even when you don't have the government involved, but you have an employer who says, look, I'm going to require everyone to have these certain vaccines in order to keep your job. Well, there's Title VII protection requiring religious accommodation for sincerely held religious beliefs, and they should be able to be accommodated to have their job. We have cases dealing with people who are mandated by employers to have their vaccine, even though they were working from home. From home.
Right.
That's
Yes.
no interaction. We have cases in litigation. We just won a $7.8 million judgment against the city of San Francisco's Bay Area Rapid Transit because they refused to accommodate people who are working outside and saying that they had to be vaccinated, even though the people they were serving on the masses were not required to be vaccinated. It was absolutely insane. Right now, I've had more than 24 victories defending people who were put on medical death row. That is, they were told, you can't have an organ transplant. Go ahead and die. You don't get your heart transplant, even though you're qualified in every way, because you're refusing a COVID vaccine. And so they were put on medical death row. We went into court. We have saved the lives of more than 24 people who would otherwise be killed, effectively killed, because of their religious convictions. That is a sign where our society today doesn't get religious freedom. Our public schools believe that religious freedom is secondary to what is socially correct or the radical leftist social agendas they're pushing. And we need to understand, no, true tolerance goes both ways. One-way tolerance is tyranny. And that is what we see more and more in our society that we must stand up to in the public schools, in the workplace, and in the public square.
Absolutely. What would you say to those who say, well, these particular cases, they have to be settled in court. The court will do the right thing. They will bring justice. What would you say to those people? And especially about the effects of the victims in this case going through a legal case. I mean, it doesn't mean that they have their job back necessarily.
Right.
Or some people were maybe not gotten in time and died on the, waiting for their organ.
Right. Yeah, we had two of our clients. Actually, I'll just, for the record, just let you know, two of the people we were representing, they did pass away before we could get the relief. For them to get an organ transplant. Two people are dead now because of that. That radical, cultic, pro-vax mentality. It's cultic because they're refusing to look at reality. That's why I call it cultic. They don't want to think. They turn off their brains, and people are paying the price for that. And it's to think for one moment that we can just say, well, that's okay. People can file lawsuits. Well, lawsuits take a heavy toll on people. I've seen that in people's lives. People get, lupus and other diseases that come in as a result of the high stress that they have to go through in the form of litigation. We pick up all the costs, all the expenses of Pacific Justice Institute for every single one of our cases. So it's not just, financial, that these people are still going through. Sometimes it's condemnation by their peers or their community or their neighbors, even sometimes people in their church or synagogue. So there's a price they pay. So what we need to do is not just rely on the courts. What we need to do is to push for legislation and acts of government to protect it. That's another reason why we have a whole nother division. In addition to our litigation division, we have our legislative division, where we are working right now with 20 states to pass legislation furthering religious freedom, parents' rights, the sanctity of human life. We were already successful in getting 6 states to adopt laws saying boys can't compete in girls' sports and they can't go and be naked in girls' locker rooms. We're seeing real results, but we realize there's a lot of value, especially in the red states, to get incredible bills passed. We have a Parents' Bill of Rights protection, due process protection legislation we're pushing out. And there's a lot that needs to be done on the legislative side, especially in states where we have the votes and have the majority. They just need the direction, and we're giving them that direction.
Absolutely. And we hear from many guests who are in the legislative realm that going the state route is actually the strongest at this point. So I'm very thankful you all are doing that. Would you characterize, because we've talked so much about the pharmaceutical industry and religious freedom, would you just characterize the relationship between Big Pharma and religious communities? And have you seen cases where you see that there's a relationship and, what have you observed?
Yeah, one of the problems we have with Big Pharma is they don't care about religious freedom at all.
Yeah, right.
At all. It's almost actually a menace to them, and that's why we've had hospitals that say, "Oh, you have to get the remdesivir," or "run death is near" is another terminology for it, but remdesivir, or you're not going to get treatment. It was interesting how during the pandemic, Japan, their standard protocol for treatment was ivermectin, and they had a much lower death rate, than the United States. But they control our politics, and then they have contracts with large hospitals like the Mayo Clinic, Mayo and Cleveland Clinic, and these large hospitals. We had to go in and we had to file lawsuits against, for example, the University of Michigan Medical Center and others, where we got judgments on behalf of people for them not to have to take a vaccine or remdesivir, these to protect them and their health interests, in particular their religious freedom issues. And we've saved lives, lots of lives. A lot of doctors have been very bold in this regard, but the Big Pharma is not a respecter of religious freedom. And as far as I'm concerned, they're not a respecter of what's truly in the best interest of the health and safety of the American people. Doctors also, I was shocked to find out, they actually have a financial incentive of these large hospitals and HMOs to actually push drugs. There's a financial reward for that. I'm like, how can we have a society where doctors have a financial interest in pushing drugs on patients, for patients to prescribe to drugs? It is unthinkable. And people have this in the past. We've trusted physicians. Whenever they're pushing a drug, people need to always ask, is this curative or is it dealing with symptoms? What are the side effects? Thank you. I'm going to get another opinion because of the heavy interest of Big Pharma in controlling hospitals and physicians who are now in corporate settings as opposed to small practices where they can follow their own conscience.
Hmm. So, under President Trump, in early 2025, there was the Religious Freedom Commission established. What do you think will be the outcome and findings of this commission? And do you think they will even touch the vaccine issue?
That'll be interesting because, I know of at least one person on that commission who's with an organization that who didn't lift a finger on religious objectors to COVID vaccine, wouldn't touch it, even though their budget's much larger than ours. They didn't want to be a part of it, too controversial or whatever. So I'm not sure to what extent they're really going to take that issue up the way it should be. But as far as I'm concerned, religious freedom is not selective. It's not convenient. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but religious freedom needs to be addressed as it applies to every aspect of society and humanity. And that includes individuals who have religious objections to certain vaccines or all vaccines. And I hope that they do take that up. I hope they're not hyper selective. I hope it's not just a ceremonial thing. I hope it's very substantive with real policies. For example, we have Pacific Justice too. Like I say, we're pushing for legislation that would give greater due process protection to parents and particularly religious families to not have their kids wrongfully taken by social workers right now, or denied the ability to have their kids or be a foster parent. Right now in Oregon, we've got a big lawsuit because the state of Oregon effectively refuses Christian parents or Orthodox Jewish parents from being foster parents unless they're willing to deny their faith and be willing to affirmatively affirm gender confusion in a young 12-year-old who is experimenting or thinking they maybe should change their gender or engage in same-sex or other kind of sexual activities. That's insane. And yet that's what we see in the state of Oregon and other blue states pushing that, which basically completely shoves out people of faith from being foster parents or even being able to adopt, or if that matter, even just keep their own children, because we have states now like Colorado, California, and others that effectively say if parents don't affirm their kids in this way, encourage that, then we can take their kids and mess up the lives of children. We had, real quick, we had a case of a child, a girl, early adolescence, told her friend she thinks she may be a boy. She was taken from her parents because of that. Her parents are a Christian family, says, no, we're going to get her Christian counseling. Social worker said, oh, no, you're not. Here's a warrant. We're taking the child. They wanted to go ahead and start the injections, get guardianship, start the injections. We went into court to prevent that. We got an order preventing it from happening. Then we fought for over 2 years for that girl to be given back to her parents. We won at the very last hearing. The girl said to the judge, Your Honor, actually, I don't really even feel like I'm a boy anymore. And she would have been sterilized and had body parts cut off before the age of 18 under Governor Gavin Newsom of California and his policies. And that is in blue states across the country. That's how severe religious freedom violations are. And it spills over into parents' rights. And that's why we want to get legislation like this adopted throughout America, and even at a federal level.
Would you say that actually goes beyond religious liberty violations into the religious persecution realm?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, who should ever in the United States today say, I guess I should move out of state from California to Texas or Tennessee because of my religious beliefs? That's unthinkable. I mean, that's why pilgrims came to America, is because of their religious beliefs. And yet we have people right now leaving one state, Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, and moving to freedom states that respect religious freedom. It's unthinkable, but that's where we're at now. Overt religious persecution. And we see it in the workplace as well. Open bigotry and discrimination. Some large corporations that do this. You either bow the knee to their latest radical leftist agenda, social agenda, or you lose your job. You either say pronouns. We have cases dealing with employees where the employee says, look, I just won't use pronouns. I'll refer to the person by their last name, but I have religious convictions. I can't affirm someone's being a different gender when I see that's blasphemy against the Creator. And the employer says, no, you must say pronouns. You must say their new first name, or you lose your job. That's bigotry. And so we're filing lawsuits across the country to prevent the second attempt to purge people of faith from their jobs. We've seen it once before under the pandemic. We seeing it taking place under this radical LGBTQ social agenda of intolerance, bigotry, and hatred towards people of faith who simply want to keep their jobs and not compromise their religious convictions, something that been respected since our nation's history.
Now, President Trump has tried to weed out the DEI, and that includes all of the pronoun usage. But you kind of have a pulse on the maybe cultural acceptance of this. So is the culture going along with that, or is this just kind of an administration trying to weed it out?
Yeah, Trump's doing what he can with executive orders on that, which we highly appreciate and respect. But you still have companies and corporate cultures filled with bigotry and discrimination, whether it's Southwest Airlines and their propaganda that they have been implementing in their company and to their employees. Some people call it South Woke instead of Southwest. You have Cox putting in their propaganda of whether it's drag queens or LGBTQ propaganda on the frozen screen. If you put it on hold long enough, you have large companies that are still implementing this. Costco says has doubled down on DEI and saying this is what we are. We're in favor, effectively, of bigoted, racist discrimination, promoting people because of their gender, their race, their sexuality, sexual lifestyle. We're going to promote that. We don't care about treating people fairly and equally, much less because of their religious beliefs or convictions. So we still see it, and we encourage consumers to be aware of it and to choose to do business elsewhere if they can. Sometimes it's very difficult. I get that. But the voice of the consumer is very important. We saw it being very effective with Target. They did an about face We've seen other companies do completely about faces, but we still have large segments in the commercial industry that are still, smoking the weed, if you will, the cultic weed of radical LGBTQ and other leftist social causes at the expense of religious freedom, decency, and humanity.
Mm. Oh, this is all hard to hear. I mean, I think as of last summer, Costco hadn't said much with the wokeness, but it seems like they're going after it now. So is this recent?
Yeah, they doubled down. Now, if they've changed their position and said, "Oh no, we're not going to do DEI," what I'd like to find out about that, and I'd be happy to announce that on all my radio program and everything else. But
Yeah.
what they came down with was a doubling down and saying, "No, we are for DEI. We're going to push it." We see universities trying to do end runs to support racism in their admissions of students. They're still doing that. They're finding different ways to do it. In California, the new standard that they're trying to do is if you have any heritage of slavery in the United States and your family history, for those people, we're going to give you more financial assistance and da 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 da. It's still racism, and that's being challenged, and I'm sure the Supreme Court is going to rule it accordingly, a violation of either Title VI of the Civil Rights Act or possibly the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment if it's dealing with a public university.
Well, one more question before my final one. Uh, what on a scale from 1 to 10, how are we doing with religious liberty in our country, and how would you sum up the state of religious liberty?
I will say where things are improving from the legal perspective, things are definitely improving. Some of the great case law that's been established because of President Trump's appointments and during his first term have resulted in some really wonderful religious freedom issues, religious protection of religious organizations, of religious individuals in the workplace, religious employers, religious speech. We're seeing great case law, and we at Pacific Justice Institute are working very aggressively to take advantage of this case law and helping set stronger case law. So, from a legal perspective, I'm very excited, very optimistic. Religious perspective, we've seen a growing hostility and bigotry towards people of faith. That said, within the last 6 months, we have seen a sharp uptick in young males choosing to take their faith seriously. Uh, and I can show you stats on that. It's across the country. I see no, uh, campaign to justify this, but maybe perhaps the beginning of a new revival in our country that we haven't seen since the late '60s and early '70s. But we'll have to see where that happens. I'm somewhat optimistic, therefore, on the non-government, on the social side. But bottom line, people, if they need to take their faith seriously, they need to practice their faith. And if they don't, then they're begging to lose their faith and their religious rights to practice their faith in the United States of America today. Freedom is not a guarantee if we don't defend it and if we don't practice it. And both are equally important in maintaining our freedoms and liberties. And we at Pacific Justice Institute stand by to help protect those who do take it seriously without charge.
Mm. And before I ask my final question, where can people find you?
Absolutely. We have incredible free resources on our website, including our free e-newsletter, Keeping Up with Our Cases. They can find that at our website, pji.org. P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org, pji.org. If they need assistance, or if they want our free resources or get our e-newsletter or support our work, just go to our website, pji.org.
Excellent. All right. So, if the average American citizen could do one thing, and I'm going to change it a little bit, one thing to promote religious liberty, what would it be?
Invite your neighbor to church, or if you're Jewish, to synagogue. But there's a study out that said that more than 7 out of 10 people who do not go to church would go to church if the person at work that they know invited them to their church. And the reason I say, well, hey, what's have to do with religious liberty going to church? Well, a society that practices faith in religion is a society that is going to respect and value religion and faith. As we increase our society level of practice, we increase society's appreciation of it, and with that, society's willingness to protect it. So I say you don't have to be a lawyer to impact religious freedom. Invite your neighbor to church, the person at work to church, and love them, and most importantly, practice your own faith and your own personal relationship with God. Of course, is fundamental to anything else.
Absolutely. That is excellent. Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was wonderful to speak with you. What a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.